everyone, it's me, Kristan, otherwise known as the author Kristan Cannon. We've had a really rough COVID-19 lockdown for the past couple of years. And I'm not sure if you remember, but when this first got started, a bunch of authors got together and decided we were going to start reading a chapter a day until what we thought lockdown would be over. In our case, is a chapter a day. In my case, is about 32 chapters in a book. We all thought it'd be over that fast. More fool us. Thanks everyone for hanging in. I'm a little late to the party because my book needed to be taken down and re-edited. It was my own personal choice because I felt the book deserved the best it should have in the way of editing and revisions. And my writing had come such a long way since when I first started, from when I'd first written After Oil. So, after some thinking and reading it and looking at it and going like, my writing has come so far, let's do it. Like, I'm going to remake it. I mean, like, Hollywood gets to remake movies, why not me? So here we are, a new version of the book. Normally I would be reading out of a hardcover, but mine haven't arrived yet. So I'm going to read off the galley proofs, a chapter a day until hopefully lockdown is over soon. They're actually easing restrictions here in Ontario, so maybe by the time I get through this, it might be over. Knock on wood. If they aren't, well, I'm one of those that thoroughly believe in that the precautions we have are necessary. I live with my 86-year-old grandmother and my dad, who was just recently diagnosed with leukemia, so they're both walking risk factors that if either one of them got it, I'd be saying goodbye. And my health isn't that great either when it comes to breathing, so if I got it, there probably wouldn't be any more books. So with that being said, let's get to the chapter reading, and I'm going to read chapter 1, start with chapter 1, and then we're going to go with, I'll read chapter 2 tomorrow. So let's start with the part that isn't quite a chapter. Sudden endings are a myth, but change is hard. We often ignore warning signs in favor of the comfort of routine. We ignore the gigantic flashing signs which warn, either reverse your course now or fall over that edge. Until, of course, change strikes like a thunderclap and sweeps our comfort zone out from under us. By then it's too late to change our course. Our skiff was too far into the rapids, and the waterfall now loomed in wait. All we could do was hang on and hope to survive. I know this from experience. Until that one fateful winter, my life was as normal as the next. I had what I needed to live, and perhaps more. And then it all vanished. From the diary of the first regent of Walden. A little bit of background to my books. They take place in a post-apocalyptic Sudbury. Walden is actually a region to the west of the city. So much of it takes place in that part of the Sudbury region. As there is more than one main character, there's 4. Each thread of the story takes place in a different part of the story, or in the city. Eventually they all weave together as the series goes on, and even as the one book moves on, that it becomes obvious on how these are all interconnected. Chapter 1. Have you found a station yet? Marissa looked up from the middle console in the green SUV. Obviously not. I didn't hit anything that hard to knock the aerial loose, Derek pointed out. We should be picking up one of the stations by now, or even on the sat. There's nothing, said Marissa again. Derek Moss yawned as he rubbed his eyes with one hand. When they had started out, the sky had been gray but still bright enough to need his sunglasses. Between McCarrow and Sudbury, the sky had darkened. Not only had he been standing outside, would he have had trouble seeing the hand in front of him, but the road had vanished underneath a blanket of white. Not that it worried him. Drove through worse than this, he thought. We'll probably do so again before it's time to hang up my keys for good. The aging Jeep Cherokee was showing hints of rust popping up on the hood again. He had a feeling it would be the last winter he drove it, but he wasn't sure if he would trade it in or pass it down to someone else in the family. That depended on what the dealership offered him, not the Jeep's fault. He looked over at his wife again as she watched the electronic scan in the radio flip around and start over again. We should have been home long before this. The weather's just not cooperating. The clouds had shrouded the sinking of the sun hours ago. The only sign of afternoon becoming dusk, and then night, had been the progressive difficulty in seeing anything at all. There were no lights on the road or along the road. Derek hadn't seen another car or truck in hours, not since McCarrow and the Espanola turnoff. He blew out a breath and squinted through the windshield. He rubbed his eyes again, straining to see through the murk, flicking his eyes right and then left. He could just see the dip on either side of the highway where the ditches were. He tilted his head as he leaned forward. Marissa looked up from the radio. 3 large trucks blocked the road in the middle of the road at the lights at Denloo. He briefly glanced at Marissa, but only got a shrug in return. Once they were close enough to see them, he knew the drivers could see him, but the 3 trucks didn't move. He didn't slow down, and if he went any slower, the SUV wouldn't be in motion at all. But he did cautiously go around them until he found a cleared spot and stopped the SUV. The 3 soldiers stared at his SUV, and it amused Derek as one looked through the gap between 2 of the trucks back down the highway. His jaw dropped a little, but he motioned for Derek to drive into the actual blockade queue, as if it was the opposite direction and the other lane. Once he had done so, they motioned for him to get out of the SUV. Derek looked at Marissa as he unclipped his seatbelt. Well, that's odd. She nodded in agreement. Do you think they need both of us out? I don't think so, answered Derek. He opened the door and the soldier said, Can you kill your engine, sir? Derek blinked, but it took a moment to turn the vehicle off. It'll be a bit chilly for my wife in a minute. Can you both exit the vehicle then? Derek felt his eyebrows rising. What? Thankfully, Marissa had already moved to exit and was putting her coat back on, her breath fogging the air in front of her as she wrapped her scarf over and under the top of her coat and put her gloves on. Sir, where did your wife and you come from? Asked a soldier. Blind River, he answered. The wife and I have family there, and what are you doing? The soldiers were looking into the back of the Jeep, and one had even started the engine to check their fuel level. Half a tank, she said, sounds about right for that distance if they started at full. The first soldier looked at Derek, and Derek looked from each one and then to his wife again. Look, we're just trying to get to our goddaughter's home, which is close to here. The weather was clear and fine when we left, didn't hit the blizzard until McCarrow. What's the problem? You should have hit a roadblock back in McCarrow, said the first soldier. Our orders tell us that the highway was closed hours ago. Derek shook his head. Not a sign of anyone. The 3 looked at each other, and one shifted his weight from side to side. The first one shrugged and looked at Derek. How long ago was that? Well, considering I had to take it slow here, it may have been as long as 2, maybe 2.5 hours ago. We stopped a few times because I couldn't see past the hood. That would make sense, said one other. They wouldn't have set up by then, especially if there wasn't weather to worry about. The first soldier nodded. Good point. He looked back up at Derek. You said you weren't going far? Derek pointed to the southeast. Over there. I could almost walk if not for the snow. Well, I guess that'd be okay, said the first soldier. Just don't go further than that. There's a live fire exercise in Sudbury. Duly noted, said Derek as he and Marissa returned to the Jeep. Once their SUV headed down the road and then onto the 4 lanes before turning off into Whitefish, Marissa finally asked, A live fire exercise in Sudbury? I never heard anything either, said Derek, but now we know why the radio doesn't work. Marissa slapped his arm. You just didn't want to have to buy a new Jeep. What's wrong with this one? From Denloo, the drive took perhaps 10 minutes to Sheridan's house. Leading up to the house and into the garage was not only a set of tire tracks, but a path where a low-riding car had dragged the undercarriage through the snow. The tracks were narrow and the path low. The snow was still stainless. The car hadn't been damaged as it pushed through the loose fluff. She didn't, said Marissa, shaking her head. If she needed groceries, she probably did, answered Derek, pulling the SUV up in front of the open garage. I see one very dirty smart car. Marissa groaned and lifted a hand to her forehead. She pushed the door open and walked into the garage, leaving Derek to catch up with her. Hello, the house, she called, stopping mid-step. Derek squinted into the dark. Spots of light moved around in the garage, but the lights weren't even on. Why is it so dark in here? Asked Derek, stopping just beside her. The power's out, answered Terrence. Oh, naturally, muttered Derek. He then dug around in his coat, and he grinned as his hand fell on the cold metal of his pen light. Pulling it out and turning the barrel to turn it on, he shone the tiny flashlight's beam on the floor as he walked further into the garage. Sure enough, his goddaughters Sheridan and Shiloh Wither, and Sheridan's husband Terrence Scapale, stood just beside the slush-encrusted smart car. Hello, Sherry, I see you got some shopping done. Derek flashed the light into her car. Good grief. Did you buy enough? Sheridan's car reminded him of the game Tetris. Her car was packed solid with only the driver's seat left clear. Even the passenger seat had been crammed full up to the dashboard. Did you want to eat over the holidays? Asked Sheridan. If you read the book the first time, that was probably a little bit better and a little more smoother than it was the first in the first edition. Green grass when you go to bed, mused Gina as she leaned on the shovel near to the front window of her home, shaking her head at the sight of the neighbor across the road holding a shattered shovel in his hands and scowling at his driveway. And then so much snow the next morning your shovel breaks. And someone always assumes those cheap plastic rigs from the local discount store are enough. Gina smirked at her neighbor as she continued to shift the snow in her driveway from the asphalt to where she suspected her yard was. Apparently, he just found out otherwise. She leaned on the shovel again, gazing out into the yard, and stared at the thick white blanket covering everything. She eyed her snowblower. It meant running into town to get gas. Gina compressed her lips into a thin line. I'm gonna have to anyway, once I do this chore. Vincent opened the window and ducked his head out. Gina, what the hell are you doing? Gotta get the truck out somehow and someone's gotta do it. Since it's my shift, it's gonna have to be me. She yelled to him. He shook his head and then ducked back inside the house, shaking the snow out of his pullover. Gina heaved a huge and obvious sigh, and then resumed cleaning the snow from their driveway. The issue wasn't the snow. It was that Gina needed the red SUV out of the driveway for work. She, unlike her friend and roommate, didn't have the luxury of claiming a snow day. Typical that it's my day to be on call, she thought with a frown. From the look of it, it's going to be busy too. The truck was on loan from the fire department, and it was meant to get her back and forth from the fire station. Gina was a firefighter, something she never complained about or begrudged. It was the life she had chosen for herself. She had to go out for a shift, snow or no snow. Snow wasn't new to Gina, having grown out around Mount Cos. It's a mountain in Australia, and it's got a name that I know how to spell, but not exactly how to pronounce. So I'm going to attempt it. Kosciuszko. It's spelled Kosciuszko. I probably massacred it. In the snowy mountains, but that was nothing compared to what she had experienced since participating in an exchange program planned between Australia and Canada. She knew how to fight fires in Australia. Her people had been doing it for 60,000 years or thereabouts. But she was curious about how other countries fought fires. Australia's climate was so different to Canada's that even the bitter cold and snow were a refreshing change. Finally, Gina dug her truck free, and she planted the shovel blade first into the snow and then leaned on the handle. Their driveway was at least now mostly bare enough that a small car could climb their hill with no trouble. There wasn't even a track to mar the snow that filled the road. Where the hell is that snowplow? Should have been here hours ago. Made me cut through a snowbank harder than the hobs of hell. I'd hear about it all day, she thought. Digging through a hardened snowbank left by a plow was almost a rite of passage anywhere in northern Ontario. Vince was fond of telling her of how Sudbury had certainly never been any different. Had Gina had to cut through it, she knew he would tell her colleagues about it. Once she came back home, she would use it as an excuse for Vince to make her his specialty hot cocos, a drink that had more than just mere cocoa in it for added warmth. Honestly, if it were like this for the rest of the day, Gina would deserve the respite. Sitting with her feet up, under a fuzzy blanket, cocoa in one hand and Vince's hair in the other. Gina sighed as she pulled herself from that train of thought. She crinkled her brow. Ah. See, even I stumble over my own words, even when they've been edited. Staring back up at the house before looking over the bypass close to where they lived. It was on days like this that she wished she hadn't taken part in the program. But it was too late. She'd signed the papers and made the decision. And that was something she did. Stuck by her decisions. But it was even stranger that she hadn't even seen the plow for the highway yet either. Did something happen to the crew, she thought? She picked up the shovel, stared one last time down the highway, and then walked back to the house and to Vince. And so ends the new version of Chapter 1. So, a bit of news. I'm sure you've noticed if you've gone to my website that I've actually changed providers. It's, again, made my website a bit of a work in progress. Okay, more than a bit of a work in progress. It's a massive construction zone. As the saying goes, from when the internet was first getting its start in popularity, at least, don't mind or dust, it's still under construction, but everything works as it should. The store will be getting more artwork put into it, as well as some swag. You can probably, now we'll have swag. You can actually get a mug, a nice mug, that, again, hasn't come yet, but I'm pretty sure will come in the next couple of days, probably when I'm about on approximately maybe Chapter 7, where I will show you the new mugs for Ashes in Winter, and we might even have a cover reveal for A Season of Wolves before I finish reading Ashes in Winter. So, lots of exciting things on the horizon, and you know what? I will see you around this time tomorrow with Chapter 2.